when partisan gridlock holds the government hostage, who exactly has the power to protect the paychecks of our brave military families?
That's a huge question.
We're talking about this really dramatic confrontation between the executive branch and Congress over, well, the fundamental law of the land, who controls the money.
And that's our deep dive today. We are pulling apart the sources surrounding President Trump's recent order. He moved to bypass what he called a Democrat-driven government shutdown.
Right, and unilaterally ensure U.S. troops actually receive their pay.
Yeah. The mission here, for you listening, is to get the strategic facts straight. We're looking at the political motives, the kind of unexpected source of the money, and the huge legal challenge this poses. I mean, it really questions the core financial authority of Congress.
Okay, so to really understand the intensity of the reaction, we have to grasp the immediate crisis first.
Definitely.
By the 11th day of the shutdown, the major crisis point was that approaching October 15th pay date.
That date was absolutely the ticking clock.
Sure.
Service members were facing this very real possibility of missing their paychecks, their rightfully due paychecks.
And this wasn't just an inconvenience, was it?
No, not at all. The situation was dire. Sources, activists were warning that nearly 1 in 4 service members already struggle, to afford food.
1 in 4, that is a shocking statistic.
It really speaks to the immediate financial vulnerability.
Yeah.
We are talking about approximately 3 million military families.
3 million?
Yeah, who would be put at serious financial risk. And many of these families, they have less than $3,000 in total savings.
Wow.
So for them, a missed paycheck isn't just a disruption, it's potentially devastating. It covers rent, mortgages, basic necessities.
Hey guys, so this is the pressure cooker, the background that really spurred the executive action. President Trump announces via Truth Social that he's using his authority as commander-in-chief. He directs War Secretary Pete Hegseth to immediately ensure payment.
And he positioned this action very clearly as a necessary defense against, well, a political attack.
Right.
Exactly. The administration was laser-focused on framing the shutdown as an act of political aggression. They explicitly blamed Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and what they termed radical left Democrats.
That specific phrasing.
For the dangerous shutdown, claiming they were holding the military hostage. That word, in all caps, was used repeatedly.
It's incredibly charged language, but I suppose it defines the political battlefield they wanted to fight on.
It does.
So what was the actual core policy impasse that caused this gridlock in the first place?
Well, the sources indicate the impasse really centered on the Democratic requirement for that 60-vote threshold in the Senate to pass any spending bill.
The filibuster leverage.
Exactly. Democrats were leveraging this requirement, pushing hard for continuing and expanding health care subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, the ACA. They were essentially refusing to back any stopgap spending bill, the kind needed to keep the government open, unless address their health care demands first.
So on one side, you've got the military facing this financial cliff edge.
Right.
On the other, you have this political demand for healthcare subsidies tied to funding the entire government.
And the administration argued that House Speaker Mike Johnson, well, he'd already done his job. He'd passed a stopgap bill in the House.
Okay, so the House acted, in their view.
That's the key part of their narrative. Secretary Hegseth praised Johnson for blanketing the airwaves and giving Americans the facts. And Johnson himself had previously rejected doing standalone show votes just on troop pay.
Why?
His argument was the House had already voted to fund the government and pay the troops with the main stopgap bill. So this whole setup provided the critical narrative for the administration.
Which was?
That Congress, specifically Senate Democrats, had failed to act despite having the opportunity. Therefore, the commander-in-chief was essentially forced to intervene.
Okay, so once they felt they'd secured that political high ground, claiming the military was being held hostage, the next massive question becomes, how do you actually pay the bill without Congress appropriating new funds? That's the whole point of a shutdown, right? No appropriation, no money.
Right. Trump issued the order, use all available funds to get the troops paid on October 15th.
All available funds. That sounds broad.
It is broad. And this is where the strategy gets, well, really fascinating from a legal and financial perspective. Because they couldn't just tap the General Treasury. That's explicitly forbidden without an appropriation.
So where did they find it?
The administration had to find money that was already appropriated by Congress for something but hadn't expired yet.
Yeah.
A Pentagon official revealed the specific source.
Okay.
Approximately $8 billion that that was originally designated for research, development, testing, and evaluation, RDT&E at the Defense Department.
$8 billion diverted from military innovation and research.
That's the pot of money they identified.
Why RDT&E? Why not, say, operational funds or personnel accounts? Those seem more related to paying people.
That's the strategic nugget right there. Most defense spending for things like payroll or daily operations, it's authorized for only 1 year.
Okay.
Once the fiscal year ends, October 1st, and there's no new appropriation or continuing resolution, that money is effectively gone or locked up by the shutdown rules.
Right.
RDT&E funds, however, are typically designated by Congress as 2-year money.
Meaning they had a longer shelf life, like they were still legally active.
Exactly. They were legally available for 2 fiscal years before they expired. This time-specific classification provided a, let's say, strategic window.
A loophole.
Well, the administration would argue a legal pathway. It allowed the executive branch to transfer or reprogram those funds, arguing they're already within the Defense Department's authorized budget period, even if the purpose was being dramatically changed from research to payroll.
Okay, so the immediate benefit was clear. Financial stability for the troops, crisis averted for them.
Huge relief for millions of families, absolutely.
But this action, while providing that critical relief, it walks right up to the line of, and critics definitely say it crosses, the most fundamental restriction on executive power when it comes to money. We're talking about the Anti-Deficiency Act.
Absolutely. We have to talk about the Anti-Deficiency Act, or the ADA. This law is the main enforcement mechanism for the constitutional power of the purse.
Which is in the Constitution itself.
Yes, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. It basically dictates that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Congress controls the purse strings. Full stop.
So why does this law, the ADA, even exist? I mean, it sounds incredibly strict.
Yeah.
It forces government shutdowns even when everyone knows the money is technically sitting there somewhere, like this R&D fund.
Well, it's a really foundational constraint, and it dates way back to the 1870s. It was intended specifically to curb the power of federal agencies.
Especially the military.
Particularly the military, actually, after the Civil War. Its primary purpose was to stop agencies from creating what were called coercive deficiencies.
Coercive deficiencies. What does that mean in plain English?
Think of it like an agency, say the Army back then, just spending way over budget, running up a huge bill on purpose,
Okay.
and then essentially sending that enormous bill to Congress saying, well, you have to pay this now, or else forcing Congress's hand just to keep things running. The ADA prohibits the government from spending money beyond or even in advance of what Congress has specifically authorized for a specific purpose.
It forces accountability.
Exactly. So by taking $8 billion that Congress explicitly authorized for scientific research and development,
R&D.
and diverting it to payroll, critics argue this is a direct unilateral violation of that core principle. Congress didn't approve payroll for that $8 billion.
The argument being, Congress approved R&D, not salaries, for that specific pot of money. Repurposing it without a specific congressional vote is basically bypassing the power of the purse entirely. It's ignoring Article 1, Section 9.
Precisely. The critics emphasize only Congress has the power to reappropriate funds to change the designated purpose. So this action, therefore, is seen by opponents as a really direct challenge to the constitutional balance of power.
But the administration had a justification, right? They didn't just say, we're doing it anyway.
No, their justification for this massive diversion relies on a huge, although arguably narrow, exception written into the ADA itself.
The constitutional loophole we mentioned.
Yes, the ADA provides an exception if the expenditure is, quote, necessary to the discharge of the president's constitutional duties and powers.
Okay, so what specific constitutional duty are they citing here?
In this specific case, the entire legal argument rests on the president's role as commander-in-chief.
Okay. So the argument goes, failure to pay the troops immediately threatens national security. It undermines the fighting force.
Right.
Therefore, the constitutional duty as commander-in-chief actually trumps the normal requirements of the ADA in this crisis situation. It's a fundamental assertion of executive power during an emergency.
It is the ultimate legal counter-argument they could make. And, you know, we also have to note the reality of enforcement here.
What do you mean?
Well, while ADA violations can technically lead to punitive administrative actions against government employees like demotions or even getting fired,
Okay.
the sources we looked at note that despite the law being over 120 years old, No one has ever actually been criminally convicted or even indicted for an ADO violation.
Ever in 120 years.
Apparently not. So this low probability of serious, criminal enforcement certainly lowers the practical risk for any political actor deciding to push the legal envelope like this.
Right. That context is important. So, okay, let's pivot then to the political strategy and the fallout, the ramifications. The optics of this move were, well, for the administration, they seemed absolutely flawless, didn't they?
Oh, politically it was seen by many commentators as a masterful stroke. By ensuring the troops were paid, the administration instantly seized the moral high ground.
How so?
Well, think about it. Any opponent who tried to legally challenge or somehow stop the payment, they would immediately face accusations of hating the troops or enabling the shutdown, hurting military families.
Yeah, that's terrible optics.
Horrible optics. The maneuver effectively neutralized the primary sympathetic constituency, the military, and it shifted all the blame for the continued shutdown squarely onto the Democrats and their demands.
But this relief, this political win, it came at a very specific practical cost. We mentioned it before, that $8 billion diverted from RDT&E.
And that cost is real and potentially long-term. Those research and development projects are now being deprived of their authorized funds.
So what does that mean practically?
It could mean slower development of new military technologies, delays in testing crucial equipment, basically a pause on innovation, all potential consequences stemming from a political fight over a short-term spending bill.
And crucially, this relief was highly unequal, wasn't it? The focus was laser sharp, exclusively on the military.
Yes, and this is a critical point when you look at the political calculation involved. While millions of military families were protected, and rightly so many would argue, millions of civilian federal employees think air traffic controllers, TSA agents, people processing benefits, critical workers at the IRS, they were still subject to the normal shutdown procedures, furloughs, and unpaid leave.
Right. The sources specifically mention the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, putting about half of its employees on unpaid leave. That must have dramatically hindered government services like tax processing.
Absolutely. And beyond just the furloughs, the administration seemed to introduce another layer of political pressure.
What was that?
They had previously warned that, unlike the standard practice during almost all past shutdowns, back pay for furloughed workers was not guaranteed this time.
Really? That's a big change. Usually they get paid eventually.
It is. By removing that long-standing policy certainty of eventual reimbursement, they exerted maximum financial pressure specifically on the non-military federal workforce.
Which you could argue was a political move aimed at increasing pressure on Congress to end the shutdown, but without the administration having to endure the political fallout of hurting the troops directly.
That's certainly one interpretation of the strategy. It protects the most sympathetic group while squeezing others.
So effectively, by taking the military out of immediate financial danger, the administration significantly reduced the pressure on its opponents, on the Democrats, to end the shutdown quickly on their terms.
It definitely lowered the political temperature on their side of the street while arguably turning up the heat on the Democrats. It left them in the position of arguing about, relatively complex healthcare subsidies while the rest of the government remained closed and civilian workers were suffering financial hardship.
Right.
This action, you could argue, effectively allowed the political standoff to potentially last for what the sources called an unheard of length of time, because the most politically sensitive constituency was now protected.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really seen a remarkable clash here. Executive power versus legislative authority. The constitutional duty of the commander-in-chief deployed as the legal shield, essentially, to override Congress's explicit appropriations authority, all to protect our service members during a shutdown.
Yeah, this deep dive really demonstrates that during a crisis, that strict legal framework of the Anti-Deficiency Act gets directly tested by the political imperative to support the military. It's a fundamental tension.
And the immediate result was obvious: financial stability for millions of military families.
Absolutely. But the long-term cost, as we discussed, might be measured both in those critical diverted innovation funds from R&D and perhaps more importantly, in the institutional precedent this sets for future shutdowns.
Which brings us perfectly to a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. The administration claimed this move was absolutely necessary to prevent Democrats from holding national security hostage. Okay, fine. But if the executive branch can unilaterally tap $8 billion in R&D funds for military payroll under the commander-in-chief authority,
right,
What prevents a future administration, maybe of a different party, from using the exact same reasoning, claiming some other function is essential for national security, or is a core constitutional duty to fund any other part of the government they deem crucial during a shutdown?
Like border security or maybe pandemic response or anything else they defined as critical.
Exactly. Could this potentially weaken Congress's foundational power of the purse forever? That line between a necessary constitutional exception and simple unilateral spending just got a whole lot blurrier, didn't it?
It certainly raises some profound questions about the balance of power going forward.